It's not only my first time presenting at NACIS, it's my first time attending NACIS. Super excited to be here. So for the past 6 years of my life, it's been entirely devoted at work to international boundary research in the development of our large-scale international boundary product called Sovereign Limits. In doing that, I have become obsessed with international boundary disputes. They really tell the most interesting stories, and because this is a cartographic narrative session, I've decided to link each example on this kind of whirlwind tour with works of great literature, as one does at a NACIS conference. So in red here, you'll see approximately 20 areas, or approximately 200, important zero, areas of disputed or contentious sovereignty that we keep track of or, for sovereign limits. So there's a little bit of nuance in counting international boundary disputes, and I'm sort of going to illustrate that in these next 3 examples. So first is a kind of traditional boundary dispute between Canada and the United States in the Gulf of Maine over Machias Seal Island. You'll see 2 opposing claim lines. There's not much there on Machias besides some penguins that people like to go and visit. And I find this example particularly interesting because in 1984, the International Court of Justice issued a judgment on the maritime boundary between those 2 states south of this dispute. So it remains. Next, we have a much more nuanced example. So this is a historic map from the Library of Congress of Afghanistan. They dispute their entire boundary with Pakistan, referred to as the Durand Line, named for the British colonial officer, Sir Mortimer Durand, doesn't get any more British than that, who's responsible for its delimitation. Afghanistan disputes it because they were at a disadvantaged political situation at the time and have now had this boundary kind of enforced upon them. But they don't offer their own opposing claim line, they just would like to start from the beginning and renegotiate. If I had $1 for every dispute that arose from these colonial, poorly drawn, or purposely impractical boundaries, I'd be happy to buy everyone here drinks and dinner. Another example, kind of related, it's really started to feel like a never-ending story. This is on the border between Turkey and Syria, recently renewed conflict. And so the Kurds are a people spread across 5 modern states, and they've been fighting for nationhood since the French and the British carved the Middle East into impossible states after World War I. All right, so I've put a pause here. So this is the most prolific boundary disputes. R.L. Stine wrote an awful lot of goosebump books, and China has the most areas of disputed or contentious sovereignty with its neighbors, about 30. So my favorite of these China disputes is an area of contentious sovereignty. So there's not an actual border dispute, it's just kind of a high-risk, high-stakes area, is over Mount Paktu. I call it a ghost story because both states have origin myths at this lake. So the boundary divides it. It was done in 1964, and it shouldn't be a problem, but there's always this potential. And to kind of illustrate this sort of high-stakes aspect of this happened yesterday. Here's Kim Jong-un visiting Mount Paktu and riding this beautiful horse. All right. So moving on. So of all of the boundary disputes in the world, the largest, and I ran some area calculations because I was really interested in like what's the map on this. It's between Morocco and Western Sahara, kind of unsurprisingly, but that's only if you factor out all of the maritime space that could be disputed between 2 states. So for missing oceans, we've got South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands disputed between Argentina and the UK. The UK maintains de facto control over them and has since the 80s. They were sort of a player in the Falkland War. And fun fact, you can go on a cruise to visit South Georgia Island. All right, so moving on to an incredible series of disputes. This is the smallest international boundary dispute in the world. It's about 1.7 acres, nice suburban lawn, disputed between Croatia and Slovenia. So they actually have a kind of large series of international boundary disputes between the two of them. And in 2017, an arbitral tribunal issued an award, in theory, resolving this conflict. But unfortunately, Croatia unilaterally withdrew from it in 2016 after a bit of a scandal. And furthermore, Croatia has boundary disputes with all of its neighbors except Hungary, sort of related to the same dissolution of Yugoslavia that led to the Croatia-Slovenia disputes. So somewhat less charming would be sort of the war and peace reality that Russia has brought to a lot of Eastern Europe since its dissolution, or since the dissolution of the USSR. So Russia provides a surprising amount of covert and overt military aid to these separatist territories all across Eastern Europe. This is Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They are exclaves out of Georgia along the border with Russia. And then Russia also supports Donetsk and Luhansk in Ukraine, Transnistria in Moldova, and they've also been known to host pro-separatist conferences, attracting attendees from wannabe nation states all over the world. But now some good stuff. So this is a disputed area between Brazil and Paraguay that used to be clear-cut, contentious. It's not very big, but then in the 1980s, the two states decided to take another look at how they were handling this situation, and they decided to manage it bilaterally as a nature reserve. And since then, it's a beautiful forested area, and it's kind of, you know, they still have a dispute between them, but it's proactive in terms of dispute resolution. Another state that's taken an epic approach to dispute resolution would be between India and Bangladesh. They have over 10 agreements between them on the delimitation of their boundary, coming out of the same colonial period that led to Afghanistan's issues. And what's pictured here are just a small portion of the almost 200 enclaves and enclaves within enclaves that were shared between the two states. And in 1974, they started to work towards dissolving these, just sort of more convenient boundary management, people management. And in 2015, they completed that process, leaving just one enclave, Tinbiga, and Bangladesh leases an access corridor from India to have sort of continual interaction with the people there. So the people living in those enclaves, they were allowed to switch nationalities at the time of all of this, or to move. But this is still really kind of a hard border, managed kind of intensely on India. They have a massive fence about 150 meters from the border. And they still have one tiny little dispute that, despite all of the other work that they've done, they can't manage to resolve. This is just west of the Indian city of Bologna, and along it, Bangladesh claims a historic river course based on a survey done in the 1970s. And India says, no, 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 we should resurvey because the river has changed course and would like to update the boundary. So they are currently working on that. So I want to end on kind of a positive note. Last Friday, on October 11th, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia won the Nobel Peace Prize for resolving over 30 years of a boundary conflict with Eritrea, in addition to a 30-year war of independence and separation, sort of post-colonial. So the new Prime Minister's mission last year was to promote peace. They signed a peace deal in 2018 based on a 2002 kind of third-party delimitation. So here you've got, in white is Ethiopia's former claim, and in red is the sort of now accepted boundary. So it's not often that I get to feel hopeful about the resolution of an almost 60-year conflict in working in international boundary research for so long. But with the eyes of the international community on Ethiopia, I think this is a border that we can call undisputed, and that it will remain this way. So if you want to know more about disputes, you should check out our blog. I write all the time about crazy situations that I found, and I'd love to take any questions if I have time.
Awesome, thank you so much. You actually do have time for a few questions. So do we have any questions in the audience? Okay. First.
So based on your experience, like, what do you think it contributes the most to resolving the disputes?
I think it really requires a bilateral will to address the problem and to work together to do something about it. I think often you have situations where one state or the other feels disadvantaged and they can't let any territory go. But if there's ways to compromise, then you really do see the possibility of resolving a dispute. And I love the idea with the Brazil and Paraguay kind of working together jointly to manage it. It sort of de-escalates the situation. That might be a good first step.
I noticed one of your dots was between Greenland and Ellesmere, so Hans Island. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of what you have fun with on April 1st?
I mean, that's the ones that are kind of low stakes like that, and I shouldn't say they're low stakes because it hasn't been resolved, so clearly it's not, but those are sort of the more charming ones.
Any more questions? We have time for one more. Oh.
I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about terra nullius cases where neither country wants this one because they want that territory over there.
So I like to refer to terra nullius as a myth, because so often we look at it where you've got two states with opposing claim lines, and it appears, for all intents and purposes, that nobody wants this specific piece of land. The one that comes to mind is between Egypt and Sudan. But really what you have there is more of a full story. You have either Egypt's claim line where they cede that territory to Sudan, or you have Sudan's claim line where they cede it to Egypt. You don't really have one or the other. And that's true for Croatia and Serbia and most of the other places that you would call terra nullius.
Okay, I lied. We have time for one more question. All the questions are in the back.
Thanks for giving such a great presentation. I was wondering if you ever feel pressured by your clients or by someone else to map things in a particular way, or to draw boundaries in a particular way, and how you deal with that.
So I'm very lucky with the Sovereign Limits product that it's totally independent, and our goal is actually to be able to map it from everyone's perspective. And you get into really interesting questions when you need to read up on the policies of how India and Pakistan map their disputes, because that's important life and death situations in some cases. But for me, I don't want to say joy because that doesn't really seem appropriate, but it's like wonderful to be able to just explore and delve into these problems from kind of a broad, neutral perspective.
Awesome. Let's give a hand to Marissa.